by any means necessary, your radio stomach in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Sean Blackmon, name of Jacquie Luqman. And as always, we are your guide for connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. And today we're having another edition of our weekly segment, The Red Spin Report, where we discuss sports, politics, and struggle with Nate Wallace, co-host of the Red Spin Sports Podcast. Nate, thanks so much for joining.
Hey, glad to be here, Sean.
Absolutely. And Nate, Big Ten football is set to come back this weekend as college football seemingly continues to open up among the coronavirus pandemic, although it still seems to be having some serious impact on both college and professional football, as we've been discussing with you here on the show. And, you know, there was an interesting piece about this because I feel like football itself and the role of it within the pandemic is something that's becoming more and more of a focus. I mean, recently there was an article in Time about this, and what stood out to me the most, they quoted a Power Five college football player who explained it saying, I mean, the whole goal is to make everyone feel like things are normal, which they definitely aren't. Even as a player who's living it, you have to remind yourself that this is in no way normal. What you're seeing and hearing on TV isn't the whole story. It's a patchwork put together in order to resemble what we tell ourselves is what's normal. It looks and feels good to watch football again, but it doesn't mean everything occurring behind the scenes is being done right. Protocols are BS. They just keep quiet. To those involved within the program or otherwise, and do everything within their power to get to the next Saturday. Now, that to me is pretty powerful, Nate. And within these conversations about the contradictions in college football, with, interestingly, you know, some even calling for its abolishment. And I'm just wondering, you know, how you're sort of seeing the role of football and all its contradictions, even with fan culture and all of that, up until this point in an already very intense moment in our society.
Yeah, so I'll start with kind of a personal anecdote and then build up into how it relates to the overall issue. And it kind of starts with, you know, as the pandemic really broke out, and I'm a teacher and I was teaching at home, many people being at home in the springtime. And I noticed a podcast that came up, and I forget exactly how I found out about it, but it was called The End of Sport. And a group of academics, a professor, Nathan Kalman-Lamb from Duke, Darius Silva, who is assistant professor of criminology at King's University in Ontario, and Johanna Mellis, who's also a professor at your Stennis College, and they wrote the timepiece. All right, and so I've been listening to them, and it caused me to kind of struggle with a lot of things because, you know, football has been very central in my life. You know, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. My co-host author of Red Spin Sports, Michael Sampson, grew up playing ball. And it's something that also has a great cultural power. And we talk about it a lot in terms of the power that is the power is vested in a lot of these major institutions and the connections that the boosters and the people that finance these programs have with the ruling class and all sorts of insidious industries that are not benefiting, working class Americans, and how they exploit, how exploitative the recruiting process is and all that. But at the same time, one of the contradictions to struggle with is that, you know, I've also coached high school football. We live in a neoliberal capitalist landscape that already does not have many options. And having worked at primarily, at inner city high schools in Jacksonville, Florida, and up there in Jersey City now, and having coached and not coaching anymore, but you realize that unless there's larger programs that are built, a lot of times like football serves as a structure. It serves as giving some sort of stability and to maybe get them to a point where in their lives to where they can, it's just, as sad as that is, the reality is without investment, without the kind of programs we need for community uplift, and to just like, so if football is not there, there's a vacuum, especially at places like Lincoln High School in Jersey City, where I know the head coach well, and they've there's a great documentary. If you look up Lincoln football, The Last Ride on YouTube, you'll see the student-made documentary. They got that student who played a scholarship to Rutgers, actually. And you see that, like, without that structure there, without what Coach Hamp builds, he's a strong intellect, and we talk about Paul Robeson and all kinds of things, and he tries to really make sure that these kids are developing beyond, just football players. So there's a lot of variety between what kind of coaching happens. But the game is violent, right? There's no doubt about it. There's no way you can make football safe. So my struggle has been with, understanding the opportunities and the lack thereof for a lot of kids from oppressed nationalities, especially African-American males growing up, teenagers and, even younger. And then also knowing how big of an institution like youth football is in a lot of Black communities in the South and other parts of the country, and people that have, and it gives an organizing unity. And I just don't know how you get rid of that without replacing it with something. And within the context of the world we live in now, people that saw the debate last night and what we don't have to offer young people, it's a sad commentary that I struggle with that, because everything that Nathan, Derek, and Johanna say in the piece and are citing about the motives of big time athletic departments, about their motives for wanting to keep playing during the pandemic, how it's potential harm, or what we don't even know what all the things about COVID yet, so it's left unknown. But the push to keep playing and normalizing that as if it's just we're just analyzing the ball game. So you hear Lincoln Riley, he doesn't want to release COVID data at Oklahoma. Same thing with Will Muschamp at South Carolina because of competitive advantage. They want to keep that under wraps. And so they're normalizing the notion of just playing, of course, during the pandemic and making it all about play. But one thing I think that just I've learned is that I appreciate the End of Sport podcast post and whatnot in terms of challenging me to think about that. But it's also kind of what I just hopefully articulated is that the struggle you have, even as someone like myself who suffered severe back problems, degenerative disc disease, affects my life on a daily basis now and into adulthood. And there's a lot of others that are in the same token. So you would think that because of that I would just want to be totally divorced from it, whatever. But there is something that is central to identity formation in this country that's built up. Maybe it's watching SportsCenter as a kid. It's the experiences you have playing in the park with your friends growing up, and the sense of meaning you have, the sense of connection. There's certain friends I have growing up that I don't even, without talking about ball, there's not really much to discuss. And I think that's maybe a similar quandary a lot of people find themselves in. And it doesn't mean that, I'm not trying to make a definitive statement, but I'm saying that some of the contradictions I just highlighted are things that I think other people need to wrestle with because they're something that people do deal with and are fundamentally real and are not easily reconciled within the context of this capitalist system we're living under right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the way I approach this next question that I have for you, Nate, because I feel like in this capitalist system, it seems to me that it is easier for working class, poor and oppressed people to form a solidarity bond over something manufactured rather than, this outside or external thing that was created practically, if it wasn't created for the profit of other people using the bodies and the labor of those working class and poor and oppressed people, it evolved into that. And I think that's sort of what sports, and football in particular, is right now. Football wasn't created, for the profit of other people. It's a sport, it's a game, it's fun, it's enjoyable, but clearly others do profit off of the labor and the bodies and the work of other people. A lot of those people, poor and oppressed working class people, or people from those groups. And in this system, it seems like it is easier for people to form bonds over this, manufactured thing of football, over a pastime, rather than to find solidarity in the fact that they're the ones fueling the profit for other people and using that basis of solidarity to change the system, to challenge and change the system, rather than to coalesce around the bonds of football to maintain the system of football as it exists. Does that make sense? Because I'm looking at this from the perspective of how we're conditioned to see solidarity from the position of the people who actually control the mechanisms by which we bond with each other.
Yeah, no, I love how you frame that, because I think what it really hits at is it's really puts the microscope on the reality that is what it is in this country, which is for many oppressed youth, they suffer from a condensed, a repression of their imagination at a young age, a sort of narrowing, the reductionist sort of lens in which is presented to them of what's available to them in the world. And so at a young age, I'm teaching middle school right now at a tough, situation where we're 100% free lunch here in Jersey City. And the kids are all dealing with all sorts of issues right now. but this is only the second year I've done that. I usually taught high school, and I see it all the time. That just trying to expose them to things outside the world of what they're seeing and hearing. And in a pandemic context, and we're on remote instruction, they're not exposed to much. And so the ruling class does that. They have their parents are having to work night shifts at Amazon and Prime, the fulfillment centers and all sorts of other jobs that are pulling them away, preventing them from making connections, having that quality time to go and explore the world, discover your interests, right? Discover things that, you develop a real curiosity about. So what happens is it develops a mentality where you think about just escaping. It's the whole motif of making it out the hood. You always hear, you got to make it out, which is understandable for people in there, but it doesn't get to the question of what does it say about a system where the only thing you can imagine success as is, quote, making it out. And, football plays into that. The whole idea of like trying to become a hip hop, star, right? And making it big plays into that. Not that like there's anything wrong with like wanting to, make it big or, be, successful or reach the highest pinnacle of whatever your potential enables you to reach. But it shows like a total fetishizing really of like the whole exceptionalism, right? The few examples of people who make it out that we can highlight on the news and mainstream media and project to the rest of the country and the world the idea that the U.S., anything is possible, right? Nothing limits you except your own lack of initiative. And that's just fundamentally not true. I mean, because, I've been even recently hearing conversations with Shannon Sharp and Ice Cube talking about that. And I know the Ice Cube thing's been, I don't want to really get into that, but just for the context of this, they were just talking about how hard it is for even people with good credit in the Black community to get business loans and whatnot in this country. And that's just true. And you look at the number of, 13% of the population is African-American, but only 3% of business loans are going out, so that shows right there that there's structural, inequality built in, and the lack of imagination and the fact that they feel like they have to build solidarity through these manufactured systems, as you put it, is really a symptom of a system that is hyper individualistic, that sees solidarity as anathema, that doesn't want, that in its conditioning, a big class of people in this country, even by the time they're in, middle school, where I'm having them right now, to be the workers that are going to be the engine powering the machine of U.S. capitalism for the next generation. And it even affects the kind of education policy stuff we have, where everything's centered around skill acquisition and, college and career readiness, and not just through developing you as a full human being that can then make decisions on your own. And, those are all, linked together. And I think the way you framed it is a really good way of looking at it. And it paints a bleak picture.
Yeah. And, the class aspect of what we're discussing, Nate, and the systemic aspect as well is so important. Because, like you say, you're from Jacksonville, I'm from Pensacola. We're both Florida boys, me from the Panhandle, you more so in the Big Bend area. But, we know that football is religion down there. And I don't know if y'all have this in Jacksonville, but I know in Pensacola, they have the little leagues from when the cats is real small, real young. You know what I'm saying? The meanie mites and all these kinds of things. Like even that is such a big deal. And again, as you described, a lot of times it is Black youth from poor and working class backgrounds who are sort of in that position from a communal standpoint because of the contradictions of the capitalist system. And their whole life is then centered around sort of having their labor exploited up through the college, era if they make it to that point. And even if they're able to get into the league at another level, although they stand to make far more money in the league, but certainly it pales in comparison to say what the owners and whatnot get as well. And so the whole issue, this whole football thing is just interesting how it comes to, in a way, almost be sort of illustrated or sort of the broader labor exploitation issue on the in the capitalist system. And with the last couple of minutes here, Nate, I'm just wondering whether you sort of see it the same way in terms of how labor relations play out in the sporting world.
Yeah, I do. And as we've had these conversations the last few weeks, and I think I've even had more thoughts and quite frankly, it's been, challenging kind of internal struggles within myself, because I have a great deal of respect for the authors of the timepiece you quoted from and the End of Sport podcast hosts and Nathan and Derek and Johanna. But I have a hard time, seeing, going all the way towards abolishment of football, which I fully understand. I mean, the writer Buzz Bissinger of Friday Night Lights, the popular movie and TV show, supports that same position. But the problem is, I sort of see it with if you abolish it, if you just abolish a sport like that has such a cultural resonance and role, but without like replacing it, and it's just within the context of this system, it's almost like the idea of abolishing the police instead of community control of the police. Because the whole idea of if you abolish the police, well, then the fear is like, the wealthiest people of the 1% and the 0.01% are just going to be able to hire, their own private, complete privatized security forces and whatnot. And that's scary too. So it's like it gets to the structure of things. And you're right. And in these like places like Pensacola and Jacksonville and cities throughout the South and other, Midwest too, and especially in African-American communities, you have the centrality of that, of the Pop Warner parks and the Little League football parks, and like the way that they provide a structure, they provide a safe haven for the dangers that go on in their neighborhoods and their streets, and provide a sense of structure and organization. To say just like take that away completely, I feel like you're going to lose some people you're trying to build solidarity with. And I don't want to fracture the sort of coalition we have that you're trying to use, that look at football and use it as an example where you can highlight it as a site of social exploitation, economic exploitation, but also in those communities, just in a real level, there's a lot of empowerment on a local level before you get to the big level high school, the big recruiting machine, college, and the NFL. And unless you've experienced that and been to those parks and seen that or taken part in that, if all you hear is the stuff that is awful we hear from out of major college ball now and the NFL, all this COVID stuff, and even CTE and everything else, which is all true, you're not going to fully understand that and appreciate it. And you might put off some people that are, dealing with enormous challenges in their own life and think that it's sort of like you're kind of some academic, like artsy-fartsy who doesn't understand them. And I hope that doesn't happen is what I'm saying, because there needs to be serious conversation about this and it needs to be taken on. But I just don't know if pushing, making it seem as if you're, enjoy the game still at all, that somehow you're totally complicit is necessarily fair for everybody. I mean, I think that, there's levels of complicity, people that are broadcasting, people that are directly profiting off of this thing, these big networks and the universities, of course. But, people that just grown up with the game and, especially ones that have suffered the injury deals and live with that, it's not as easy just to totally, unplug as, might think. So I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I think these are sort of things we need to chew on and continue to try to all collectively sort of struggle with, to sort of see how it ties into trying to build a new world, how we resist the sort of structures of oppression we're dealing with right now. And I think that from there we can really figure out what the best path is going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the question of abolition, I think, for anything ultimately becomes a question of the capitalist state itself and the structure, as you pointed out. But we appreciate you so much, as always, Nate, for joining us today. We're going to leave it there. We're moving to a break here on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik from Washington, D.C., but we will be back. So please stay with us.
By any means necessary.